Hello, everyone. This is Scott, host of Ruminate This with Agrarian Solutions. We truly believe that any organization is only as great as the people within that organization. In this special Meet the Team series, I will sit down one-on-one with every team member and learn more about their passions, interests, and what drives them to strive for excellence every day. We hope you enjoy getting to know us. All right. Hey, welcome everybody to another episode of Ruminate This, the special series, Meet the Team. And today we are bringing in the one, the only Miss Jamie Propst. So, Jamie, I give you props, no pun intended, for doing this. On one hand, because you, Jamie, we're going to learn more about Jamie in a future episode of Meet the Team, but Jamie, you're involved with doing your own podcast. You and your husband have a fishing charter business. You're an amazing coach and entrepreneur, and yet you're taking time out of your day to come on here and help us out. And for me, it's going to be a little bit different type of call because we're going to kind of reverse roles a little bit. So rather than bore our entire Ruminate This audience with Scott Zehr interviewing Scott Zehr, aka talking to himself, which I do plenty of, and my wife finds it annoying.
Sounds entertaining, actually.
I don't know. I don't know about that. Jamie has volunteered to put the host of Ruminate This on the hot spot, or in the proverbial hot chair, if you would. So with that, Jamie, it's all yours, honey. Let's go.
Awesome. Well, I am excited to have you in the hot seat here, where I get to turn the tables and just interview the heck out of you on your own podcast. So thank you so much for inviting me here today to be a guest host. And just want to say, I know how hard it is to be a host of a podcast, and you do a tremendous job. So I'm kicking it off with that. But let's dive in to pulling back the curtain of who is Scott Zehr. And when we were talking about this process a little bit, I love the fact that the creative side of what Agrarian is doing here is really wanting people to get a better understanding of who's behind the brand, because it's all about people. Every single thing is about people. And I've been grateful to be able to have a little slice of the Agrarian team working with you guys. And you guys are tremendous humans. Every single individual brings such a cool balance to the group, and it just elevates everything and everyone. So I feel very grateful to be kind of on the sidelines of this team. And I'm excited to dive into the story of Scott Zehr. So first of all, who's Scott Zehr? Tell us.
Oh, that's kind of a loaded question, I think.
It's your question. Heads up.
Oh, man. I should have thought about that before I sent that question out to everybody else. Jamie, I just want to touch on, I think, one thing that you mentioned, and it's about the people, right? And so I know my listeners have heard this before out of my mouth, but Jamie, you show me a business that's ever done business with another business, and I'll show you the amazing men and women behind the scenes that make it happen. So that's what this is all about, right? So to your question, it's tough, I think, for me to sometimes do a self-evaluation because I think oftentimes I'm my own biggest critic. But if you were to ask me who I am, I would say first and foremost, I'm a husband to my great wife, Summer, a father to my daughter, Brooke, who is every bit of a princess at 5 years old, and my son, Cooper, who is fascinated with anything that has wheels on it. Tractors, cars, trucks, you name it, or tracks, bulldozers, excavators. You get the idea. And I think if I were to pick one term to describe myself, it would be a troubadour. I think this idea of constantly learning and constantly getting better is something that I encourage everybody to do. Myself, I had to learn, I'm going to say the hard way, that was my only option. If I wasn't going to voluntarily seek it out, it wasn't coming to me. So, yeah, I'd say that's a little bit of who Scott Zehr is.
I feel like there's some layers to unpack behind that onion, but I'm going to go down the list a little bit here and tell me how you got into the agriculture industry.
So I was born into it, really. So I grew up on a 80 cow dairy in a little town called Lowville, New York. And if you're trying to find it, it's not spelled like Loudon, New Hampshire. It's spelled like Lowville, but the uniqueness of local slang, if you would. It's a town where there's more dairy cows than humans in our county. I don't reside in Lewis County anymore. I made the big move almost 9 years ago now and moved to the neighboring county. So I'm a Jefferson County transplant. So yeah, I mean, grew up on a dairy, really I think I kind of from a young age, I wanted to be involved with dairy. Certainly there were times throughout my life where I thought I'd, take over the family farm and that kind of thing. But the curiosity side of me was probably too overwhelming to a good degree. So I became an auctioneer. I went to auctioneer school in 2003. As soon as I graduated high school, I learned the trade of carpentry in high school, worked construction for a couple of years after that. Started my own auction company in 2005, ran that till 2013, 14, and had an opportunity at one point in 2013 to work for Premier Select Sires as an AI technician. And I don't know, 6, 8 months into that, I sold my first tuba convert, which is a product that we make here at Agrarian. And I guess you would say the rest is history.
You talked about in the beginning about being a troubadour, and yet there's this layer of entrepreneurship in your history. And I know what it takes to do that. It's very hard. And yet you work for a very high level company, creating incredible products, serving clients extremely well. There's a through line in all of that. And I'm curious if you can pinpoint what that is in you.
Honestly, Jamie, I think it's about being open to opportunities, being open to challenging yourself. So if we go back to kind of some of our opening conversation today, I talked about going to auctioneer school. Once I became an auctioneer and I started helping other auctioneers sell their products or sell, do an estate sale or a farm auction, it's like, well, this is dumb. Why don't I just do it myself? So that was the start of Zehr's auction service. And it's interesting. My wife points it out to me quite regularly when I come up with some new crazy idea of something we should jump into or try or evaluate. She's like, where do you get this from? Because you didn't get it from your parents. I mean, not to pick on my dad, but he hasn't tried anything new in the dairy in a long time. But, I think honestly, for me, it's about, I always felt the need that I had to prove myself to other people. I really felt like for a long period of time that because I took a chance on trade and auctioneer school and whatever, I was way behind the 8 ball compared to my friends who, as I'm trying to, run a business at 20, 21, 22, 23 years old, my best friend was graduating from chiropractic college. Well, I guess he wouldn't have been graduating then, but he'd been almost graduating and had an opportunity. He was already in talks with a local chiropractor at the time to take over their business. So it was like, I just felt like I always had to try to figure out a way to prove myself. Luckily, somewhere along the way, I figured out that I don't have to prove myself to other people, just to myself.
I think that's a pretty powerful statement because all of us go through that, right? Where we feel like we have to prove ourselves and we're seeing successes of others or other companies or whatever. When did you discover, or how did you discover, if somebody right now is listening to this and that resonates, I feel like I always have to prove myself. When did you learn that all you had to do was be okay with you?
I would say that probably really didn't happen until somewhere around 2015, 2016, 2017, somewhere in there. I mean, it's fairly recent in the grand scheme of things. I mean, I'm 39 years old, right? And so it took a mentor of mine to bring that out of me, to flat out look me in the eyes, sit across from the table. I can still remember the day. I guess I don't remember the day, but I remember the moment. And he wanted to meet me at a McDonald's for coffee. And he sat across from me and he looked me in the eyes and he said, what the are you doing? There's so many more things that you are capable of doing. Why aren't you pursuing that more? And I said, well, I didn't do this and I didn't go to college or I didn't what I just had a list of a million excuses. And he called BS on it. And he said, life isn't about, I'll steal a little football terminology since we got the man Vince Lombardi behind me, but it's not always about the X's and O's as it is about the Willies and the Joes. So it's not always about the plan, it's about the people. It's not always about who did what or who learned what or where they went to college. It's about what you're willing to invest. What are you willing to learn now? And it took me a long time to realize that the experiences that I missed out on not going to college, there's the social aspect that I missed out on, but I made up for. But there's also, but there's the learning opportunity, right? And when I started realizing that the college education that I received on the front lines was actually probably a little bit better than what you receive in a classroom because it's real world. You don't have to learn a concept and then figure out how to apply it to real world situations. You just learn the real world situations, and the real world tells you, and it doesn't matter if you're in agriculture, if you're in other types of business, real world situations tell you, you better be able to read and react. You better be able to shift strategy or shift your plans at a moment's notice because it's not going to go the way you plan it out. So for me, it was Pete. He brought that out of me. So sorry for the long-winded answer.
No, I love that. It takes a mentor. It takes a lot of mentors for many of us. If someone's listening and they're thinking, I'd love to have that kind of leadership around me too, what advice would you give them, especially as an industry professional in agriculture?
I think what I would say is you have to understand that most people genuinely want you to be successful. I mean, heck, even your competition, they may try to take your business from you, but they don't want to see you end up on the side of the road. So if you understand that there's actually more good in people than there is bad, if you put yourself out there a little bit, just make yourself a little bit vulnerable to somebody will recognize that you're searching for something. And it might be somebody that you've never met yet. It might be somebody that has been close to you for years, but you've never given them an opportunity to work with you. It might be somebody that, you just don't expect, which was my case. The first time Pete stuck up for me was before he ever hired me. And he put his job on the line to give me an opportunity.
Why do you think that is?
I've asked him that a few different times throughout the years. And all he said is when he sat down across the table from me in the interview, he didn't think I was full of shit.
Hmm.
So for whatever that's worth.
Well, it's interesting because you started off by explaining allow yourself to be vulnerable a little bit, which to me leads to not full of shit.
Right. Yeah.
So, what kind of vulnerability? That's a hard word in business, especially when we're wanting to have it all together and just be poised and really serve our customers as good as possible and not bring our life into it at the same time. How do you balance that and show that vulnerability in a way that creates real connection?
You have to learn to be yourself in front of your customer. Like the Scott Zehr that you see today is the same Scott Zehr that shows up on a farm. It's not like I turn it on and turn it off, or you have to, I mean, certainly from a mental standpoint to prepare for a meeting or a visit, you have to mentally be ready to have a long conversation, right? But there's no front. There's no pretty storefront. And then once you walk through the door, you just be genuine. Just like be yourself. And I tried, Jamie, I tried to be people that I wasn't because I felt like I had to, because if they really knew that I didn't do these other things, why are they ever going to believe me? And at the end of the day, it still has brought me back to it's person to person. It's a lot more fun especially if you're in any kind of a sales or support role. It's a lot more fun when you go into a meeting without the expectation that you have to be the smartest person in the room. You can't bear that burden. Nobody can. So, for me, it's about just, hey, just be yourself. And I remember Pete told me, like, hey, if you're going to be in sales, number one thing is you got to have thick skin. People are going to tell you no. That's all right. And if you're yourself, and I really do think it's person to person, Jamie, because if you're yourself, right, and just think about outside of the professional space, outside of work, and you're just hanging out somewhere. I'll call it an adult establishment that serves something other than carbonated sodas. You might have a person sitting on either side of you and you've interacted with both of them, but you gravitate to this person, or this person gravitates to you and that person maybe doesn't, or whatever. When you accept that you're not everybody's cup of tea, the losses don't, like, they don't matter. Like, if you did everything you could possibly do for that person and you did it with integrity, you did it true to yourself, and it wasn't what they, it didn't resonate, that's okay. So I think that's the key. Like, don't put on a front.
Love that. And we aren't for everybody. That's one of the things, even being a podcast host, and like it's a personal relationship. People that tune into you, they're building a relationship with you week after week after week. And it's not as easy as it looks to get behind a microphone, turn on a camera, and still be yourself. You know what I mean? So I'd love to know. And also, you mentioned like collecting no's. That's what sticks in my head of in sales. You collect no's. You're not for everybody. People are going to turn you down. And that hurts a little bit. And eventually, I'm assuming it goes away. What got you to the point of that thick skin? Like taking that all off and just being you all the time in front of the camera and in a sales role?
Well, I'll share a little story about how I think that kind of started to develop. Back when I was working with Premier, I had an opportunity to move out of AI technician work in sales into a support role. And the support role was vacated by another one of my mentors who I learned a ton from. That person had left, went to a different organization, and I had the opportunity to fill that position. The person that left is a PhD. I'm nowhere near that, right? So I was like, how do I be him? That's what the customers are expecting. Like, they've been working with him. And so the very first presentation I gave in that position, in that role, was in front of a dairyman and both the owners and about 12 to 15 of their employees and some of my colleagues as well. And I was doing my thing that he would have done. I was doing his thing. I'm literally 2 slides into the presentation. I've maybe been talking for 5 minutes, and the owner stands up and he says, if this is what you're going to talk about, if this is the direction you want this conversation to go, we can cut the meeting short right now and I'll go home before the pizza gets here.
Oh, man.
And I'm like, and you could have heard a pin drop in the room. Like, it was, but again, real world teaches you, you have to be able to. And I said, you know what, Dan? Fair enough. Let's talk about the nuts and the bolts of why we're really here. And that's the insemination crew and the job they're doing on your farm. I went from trying to be my predecessor and talk about, start from like a 10, 15,000 foot view and then get to that. And what I ended up doing was coming back to what I know. I know how to get cows pregnant. I know the nuts and bolts of what it takes to get cows pregnant. And that's what we talked about. And from that moment on, we had a great working relationship up until I left to go to agrarian, and we still visit. I've told that story before, and people make the comment, well, somebody stops you like that. Like, some people would just melt. And hey, I thought of it. All right, let's close up shop and get the hell out of here and try again another day, but there's opportunities there to looking back on it. There's opportunities to look back on that exchange. And I've done this and said, what should I have done differently? And I mean, there's a whole list of things that you just try not to repeat.
Mm-hmm. So learning lessons on the fly, but having the humility to just be you in the moment and start over.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the great thing about not having to be the smartest person in the room. When you're not the smartest person in the room, they tend to give you a lot more grace. Yeah.
What's special to you about the livestock industry?
Oh man. I feel like I'm answering all of your questions with a story. So, Jamie, I'm an entrepreneur outside of my role at Agrarian, and I've been blessed to have been operating a catering business that we barbecue chicken. And that's kind of the thing. And it's looking like I'm going to be able to sell the business this year and dedicate a little more time to podcasting and agrarian and more importantly, family. But I've had an opportunity a number of times to cook for fundraisers for military family, wounded soldiers, Operation Second Chance. If you don't know what Operation Second Chance is, look it up. And so I've got to visit with a lot of our soldiers. And when you stop and talk to somebody one on one, yeah, you run across people that don't know anything about agriculture. You run across, men and women in the service that grew up in rural Texas on a ranch or whatever, all of it. And I developed this theory a long time ago once I understood, so I never served in the military, but my grandfather did, my uncles did. There's I hate the idea of grouping people, Jamie, because at the end of the day, we're all humans, right? So let's just say we break it out by sector of profession, if you would. Well, there's two groups of industry, two industries that are more important to this country than anything that we can do on this podcast. And it's our men and women in uniform and our farmers. And the cool thing, the answer to your question is if you were to ask, and I've asked a lot of military men and women this, who's more important? That old question, right? Who's more important? Is it the soldier that protects the borders so the farmers can make food in peace and feed the people and the soldiers? Or is it the farmer that makes the food to feed the soldier that protects the border so the farmer can make the food in peace? When you ask that question to a military man or woman, they tell you it's obviously the farmer. When you ask that question to a farmer, cattle rancher, dairyman, doesn't matter, they say, well, obviously it's the soldier. So I think for me, the special thing about the livestock industry is that it's a place where I can live out my passions, but although be it on a small scale in the grand scheme of the global, agriculture industry, it's an industry that it's like one of the most noblest industries you can possibly be in if you want to take care of your fellow human being.
I love that. And I'm married to a retired Navy professional, and he 100% would say the farmer.
Yeah. It's
it's so true.
it speaks so much to the mentality and the level of respect from each of those people, from those industries.
I think that transitions really nicely into my next question, is about team. What is a successful team? And even in your analogy, you just use your story, you just use like the whole country is a team. So when you boil that down to an agriculture, a small team, whether it's on a farm or whether it's your team of professionals serving your farm, what makes a successful team in your opinion?
Yeah, I love what you said. The whole country's a team. I wish we could convince more people of that, right? So I've had an opportunity, Jamie, to work on teams in the professional space where I'm an employee. I've had an opportunity to now build a team with my Maplewood Sweets business. So I've gotten perspective now from both sides as a team member and a team leader. And I think number one, there has to be a lot of transparency first. And I think a lot of people would probably put trust first. But if you're transparent, the trust will come. Like
Mm.
people aren't just going to blindly trust you. I mean, think about used car salesmen, right? So I think there has to be a high level of transparency among the team. And I think that's a great foundation. But then there has to be balance. If everybody at Agrarian were Scott Zehr, we might have a lot of really good ideas. We might have a lot of projects that we're working on, but we'd never get anything actually finished. Because, I like thinking about the what if question, but I need people on my team, and I'll use my own business for an example. I can daydream all I want about how I'm going to be selling syrup in California and Texas, which is something that producers up here think is crazy, right? I can think all I want about being the largest supplier of water that comes out of a tree in the United States because it's a byproduct of making maple syrup. But if I didn't have people on my team like Charlie and Aaron and my wife Summer, who is the bookkeeper, and like those things would always just be an idea.
Mm.
So you need balance, I think, is the second thing that I would say. You can't, it's I love the terminology, and if you guys haven't read the book or now caught the movie, The Boys in the Boat, it's yes, you want everybody on the same page or in the same boat, rowing the same direction at the same time. That's important. So don't confuse me saying that you need balance with that, because within that team framework, right, you have transparency, you have balance, but you have to have individuals that are willing to say, well, why? What if? How about this? Otherwise, even the best teams will just fall flat on their face.
So if someone listening to this is building a team, what kind of guiding principles should they consider?
Yeah, I mean, just to reiterate, I guess, the trust and balancing of skills and personalities. But I mean, I think overall the guiding principle needs to be, focused on integrity, which can be demonstrated through transparency that helps build trust. And I'll go back to the military, for example. When you're a soldier and you're on the front line, you're taught to not defend yourself, right? You're taught to take care of the guy next to you because he's taking care of you and you're take the next guy behind you and so on, right? Everybody has to have each other's back. And when I look at the teams that I've been a part of throughout my professional career since 2013, the successful teams, everybody had each other's back and we knew it.
Mm-hmm.
There was no room for misinterpretation. I remember Pete telling me one day, he goes, Scott, I'm sorry for the graphic analogy, but I will always give you enough rope to hang yourself, but I will never let you hit the bottom of the noose.
Mm.
And boy, that's empowering.
Yeah. It's a
I
strong
mean,
image not to forget, too.
well, yeah, right. But then the unsuccessful teams that I've been a part of, I was constantly questioning, is this person going to back me up if I make
Mm.
this move? And it didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So you do a lot, and this podcast is a tiny slice of that pie. What inspires you to create Ruminate This for listeners that tune in every week?
I think there's a level of buy-in that I have with what we're trying to accomplish at Agrarian. So probably 2 years ago, our director of operations, Nick Bradley, came to us and said, hey, there's this, I think I'd already read Start With Why back then by Simon
Mm.
Sinek, but oh man, it's probably been 3 years ago now that we've done this, Jamie. But so Nick had us go through the why workshop and he led it. And really it's understanding why you do what you do every day. And what I would challenge listeners to think about is if you If you haven't yet read the book, the
Click the
email,
show notes. We got you.
click the show notes. Our email is podcast@agrsol.com. I will send you a free copy on Audible. Like, happy to do it. But when I had an opportunity, I always knew kind of why I was doing what I was doing from a job standpoint. I like the dairy industry. I like to help farmers. I like to be involved with dairy farming. But the day my thought process changed, which I think is a driver of this creativity that you just asked about, is the day that I realized your why transcends your work.
Mm.
It's regardless. And it actually, Jamie, it ties in well with my comment of just be yourself. The same Scott Zehr that's at home with the kids is the same Scott Zehr that shows up at a dairy or a feed mill, right? So my why is to use my God-given and acquired talents to make people laugh, challenge the status quo, and help others find their success in life.
Mm.
It doesn't talk about work, but boy, it sure is applicable to my work. So anybody that's listening to this is probably involved in the ag industry in some respect. You might be a dairy nutritionist, you might be a cattle rancher, a veterinary. You're in that space because it's what you felt like you were called to do, that you're living out your passion, right? The only difference here is that I've had this opportunity to do some soul searching as to why I want to live out my passion in this area. And it's about helping others find their success in life. And so I think from the standpoint of the podcast, Ruminate This with Agrarian Solutions is a platform to where, hopefully we're making good content and we can continue to bring in excellent speakers and have a good, strong message that helps you be successful
Mm-hmm.
and helps your clients be successful. So I think that's the answer there.
I love that. What do you want to leave listeners with today?
It's a good question, Jamie. Usually just wrap up the show.
Final words. Final words of an introduction to Scott Zehr. We've peeled back a couple layers of the onion, and I hope that this has inspired whoever's tuning in right now to think about their why, because it's a ripple effect. And so what are your final words as we put a pin in this podcast today?
I think probably, Jamie, what I would just come back to is we work in a really special industry in agriculture. I think so often we have our blinders on in our day-to-day work to where, you become laser focused and you don't realize the impact of what you're doing today on those around you, right? You might realize it for a client, a coworker, but look beyond those borders. Look at if you're a dairy nutritionist, I'm going to use that because that's the space I spend most time in. If you're a dairy nutritionist and you've been feeding this herd and they've been, able to be profitable because of great nutrition, think about how many gallons of milk that you've helped them create that gets shipped to homes all across the United States. How many tons of cheese that's ended up on pizza on Super Bowl Sunday. It's really a special industry to be a part of. And it's not about me. It's not about Jamie. It's not about, XYZ person. I think when you realize that there's a lot of good we can do, and at the same time understand that the traditional media in this country is not going to spread the good word as much as they should about what we're doing. I think that's something to consider. And I would just say if anybody would like to visit more about it, I'm always here. Again, podcast@agrsol.com, and let's have a conversation about it. And the Why Workshop is an open invitation for anybody. If you want to dive into why you do what you do and really understand yourself from that perspective, yeah, your copy of the book is on me, and we can do a one-on-one workshop. Usually it takes 45 minutes, and then we do another call maybe a week or two later after you've had time to kind of digest, another 45 minutes. And there's always follow up and there's always continued contact to see how you're doing.
I love that. And there's something special about going through that experience with other ag professionals as well. I've also been through it myself, and it's very powerful. So if you are interested, definitely check out the show notes and take him up on his offer. With that, Scott, this conversation has been inspiring for me. Every time that we talk like this, it always is. We could go on for hours. We always can. I would turn it over to you and say thank you so much for letting me jump in the host seat and put you on the hot seat here. But it's back to you, sir.
All right. Well, thanks, Jamie. And I guess lastly, folks, continue to tune in to Ruminate This with Agrarian Solutions. We really do want to, just keep bringing you guys everything that we can and relevant to what you're doing in the industry. And I hope you're enjoying the Meet the Team series. I can't say it enough, Jamie, so I'm going to say it one more time. I loathe the term B2B sales. I think it's a crock. It's person to person. It's Jamie and Scott. It's about the Willies and the Joes. So yeah, I look forward to having more of these conversations with more of the team members, including Jamie, who has agreed to come on Meet the Team with Agrarian Solutions. So with that, we'll see you all again in a week.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
If you found value in today's podcast, please hit subscribe and share. And we look forward to talking to you again next week.